In the aftermath of Germany's defeat in World War I, the German bourgeoisie faced significant challenges. Burdened by a large war debt and grappling with economic crises, they sought imperialist expansion in the RSFSR and its allies. Angered by these actions, German workers rallied behind the Communist Party of Germany, fueling a rising tide of communism. However, the bourgeoisie, fearing the growing strength of the communist movement, supported reactionary street gangs, such as the Nazis, to suppress communists and seize power. The Social Democratic Party, betraying the communists once before, again sided against them, employing repressive measures and collaborating with conservative forces. The SPD's actions, including opening fire on communist demonstrators and banning communist organizations, further exacerbated tensions. As the German capitalist economy weakened due to inflation and the Great Depression, the bourgeoisie turned a blind eye to the Nazis' rise, allowing them to take power and establishing a brutal dictatorship that suppressed workers' movements. While the Western capitalist countries remained silent and even supported the Nazis, the Soviet Union called for peace and non-involvement in war. Unlike the warmongering bourgeois nations, the USSR advocated for socialism in one country and sought to develop peacefully. Despite joining the League of Nations, the Soviets faced German militarism with little support from the West. In contrast, Western powers provided concessions to Germany, enabling its expansion and aggression. The British capitalists, historically financing the Nazis, exemplified this dangerous appeasement. The annexation of Austria into Nazi Germany in March 1938 was followed by the Munich Agreement, involving Britain, France, Mussolini's Italy, and Hitler's Germany. The significance of this agreement, often downplayed by apologists of imperialism, cannot be underestimated. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister at the time, and Edward Daladier, the French Prime Minister, signed the agreement, which served as an act of appeasement towards the Nazis. As a result, the Nazis annexed Czechoslovakia and intensified their expansionist aggressiveness towards Eastern Europe. As the threat of fascism loomed, the Soviets called for joint defense of Czechoslovakia with the Western countries. However, the West's lack of support resulted in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia, with Germany claiming the largest share. The Western nations, prioritizing their fear of Bolshevism over countering Nazism, signed non-aggression pacts with the Nazis. Faced with such circumstances, the Soviets reluctantly pursued a non-aggression pact with Germany, buying time to strengthen their military industry and securing a buffer zone against potential aggression from the West. On April 7, 1939, Italy's fascist regime invaded and captured Albania. On March 31, 1939, the governments of Britain and France provided a guarantee of protection to Poland in the event of a Nazi attack, signing bilateral agreements of mutual aid with the country. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Britain and France declared war against Hitler's regime, but did not take significant military action until the following year. Meanwhile, the United States declared neutrality. These events highlight the complex political landscape and shifting alliances leading up to the outbreak of World War II, as well as the willingness of the West to ally themselves with fascists over the communists. During the pre-war period, as Hitler's regime in Germany was rapidly building up its military strength, the Soviet Union made several attempts to establish a defensive agreement with the European capitalist states. Despite the Soviet calls for a united front against the Nazi threat, the Western European allies declined such proposals. For instance, before the Munich Agreement of 1938, when Hitler annexed Austria, the Soviet Union proposed an international conference in March 1938 to address the growing Nazi aggression. On July 23, 1939, the Soviet Union approached Britain and France, suggesting negotiations for a defense plan in case of German attack. However, the British government had different priorities and engaged in secret negotiations with Hitler's representatives in London to secure a non-aggression pact. While the Soviet Union was advocating for an anti-fascist front, the British government was clandestinely discussing spheres of influence in Europe with the Nazis. What bourgeois historiography deliberately conceals is the fact that the Soviet Union was the only state without aggressive expansionist ambitions. Both sides of international imperialism, the so-called democratic capitalist allies and the Nazi-fascist Axis, aimed at eliminating the Soviet Union. The true enemy for both factions was the socialist construction in the USSR, and they did not hesitate to exploit each other against Moscow. The temporary non-aggression pact between the Soviet Union and Germany came after numerous Soviet efforts to negotiate a defense with the British and the French. Faced with the constant threat of the expanding Nazi army, and in order to prepare themselves for an extensive war, the Soviet state found itself compelled to sign the non-aggression pact with Berlin. What bourgeois historians and apologists of imperialism label as an alliance between Hitler and Stalin was, in reality, a necessary diplomatic maneuver by the Soviet Union to buy time and effectively prepare for a full-scale war. Even most bourgeois historians acknowledge that the Soviet policy was entirely realistic, given the circumstances at the time and the imminent danger of a Nazi attack. At the time of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the UK and France and allies were reluctant to cooperate with the USSR in countering fascism, leaving the Soviet Union surrounded by imperialist countries and their puppets. The Soviets needed a buffer zone to the west to ensure their safety and develop their military capabilities. Thus, the pact provided a means to define the spheres of influence between Germany and the Soviet Union, allowing the Soviets to secure existing bourgeois governments in the region as potential intermediaries for peace negotiations. Contrary to popular belief, the Soviet interest in Poland was to maintain an independent Polish government that would serve as a buffer against Germany. However, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland and the Polish government fled, the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact regarding Poland became irrelevant as the Polish state ceased to exist. German troops advanced beyond their agreed-upon sphere of influence, prompting the Red Army to send troops to eastern Poland. This move was aimed at preventing the Nazis from reaching the Soviet border and ensuring the establishment of a buffer state against Germany. Fun fact: prior to the Nazi invasion of Poland, the Polish government had attempted to negotiate a potential joint attack against the Soviet Union with Hitler. However, these negotiations failed, as the Polish bourgeoisie preferred to sign defensive agreements with Britain and France instead. It is crucial to note that Poland rejected a mutual defense agreement offered by the Soviet Union against the Nazis. During this period, various voices recognized the Soviet Union's actions as necessary and justifiable. Winston Churchill, in a radio broadcast, expressed his wish for the Soviets to halt the Nazis in eastern Poland as allies of the British. Even British Prime Minister Chamberlain acknowledged that the Red Army's occupation of part of Poland was necessary for protection against Germany. Moreover, the population of the region did not oppose the arrival of Russian troops. Instead, they welcomed them as peacekeepers. The Soviet Union's actions in Poland were not an act of war, but rather a defensive move to prevent further aggression from the Nazis. Beyond Poland, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had implications for other Eastern European countries. Romania faced the threat of pro-Nazi uprisings by the Iron Guard, but as Soviet troops entered Poland and neared Romania, these activities ceased. Romania returned Besabaria, a region rich in grain and previously stolen from Soviet Russia in 1918. This act encouraged the Soviet-backed anti-fascists in the Balkans to resist Nazi control. The pact also hindered Nazi advances in the Balkans, an area abundant in food and oil, by allowing the Soviets to support the Nazis' adversaries without fear of direct attack. Finland, which initially refused Soviet negotiations, provoked the Soviets by maintaining a threat to Leningrad. However, when the Soviets destroyed the Mannerheim Line, Finland surrendered, resulting in a buffer zone for the USSR's northern border. The Soviet terms of Finland were generous, with the return of nickel mines and a willingness to provide food. This move allowed Sweden to remain neutral towards the USSR, further promoting peace in the region. Similarly, the Baltic states, technically allied with the Soviets through military bases, started leaning towards a pro-Nazi stance. The USSR reinforced its military presence in these countries, and as their pro-Nazi officials fled, the Baltic states voluntarily joined the USSR as new Soviet socialist republics, driven by the desire of their workers. This was not an invasion, as these countries were already Soviet allies. By securing a buffer against Nazi invasion, the Soviets prevented further Nazi expansion in Eastern Europe. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact provided a buffer belt for the USSR, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Balkans, which repeatedly hindered Hitler's ambitions. The Soviet Union never sought to acquire more territory. Its objective was always peace. The doctrine of socialism in one country reflected this stance. It was the pact's significance that compelled bourgeois governments in Eastern Europe to recognize the necessity of Soviet protection. Hitler understood the threat posed by this pact, leading to his decision to invade the USSR in 1941, marking the start of the largest invasion in history. In conclusion, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, though controversial, served as a necessary measure for the USSR to counter German imperialism in Eastern Europe. It is essential to recognize that Nazism and Communism are fundamentally different, with Nazism being the antithesis of socialism. I have made other videos about Hitler and his supposed National Socialism in the past, and I would recommend you checking them out if you are interested in the topic. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did appreciate all the work and research that went into it, I would love to see you like and subscribe. Thank you.